welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to talk about how to draw a yellow mongoose. So, let's get arting. Alright, here is the yellow mongoose. They look kind of cute on the sketch. We'll see how they turn out. Their eyes have kind of the same, which usually I don't sketch it in, but I did because it was unique. They have that same sort of block that like goat's eyes and stuff do, that they're, they're not an oval. They're kind of a rectangle turned sideways. So, yeah, we're just going to get started. Just like always, right, staggering the fur. They have some white. That seems to vary how much white from mongoose to mongoose. They all have some white right under here, but some of them have white under the eyes leading into the sides of the head. Some of them have less, some of them have none. It seems to definitely be a mixture. They look almost cat-like. It's looking pretty cute. Now to get this white in here, and we'll probably muddle up the white a bit. Mix some of the brownish yellowish fur into it. We'll see about that. And then their noses are black, and there's a ring around their eyes that are black. Alright, and then the final thing to add is going to be that black, which, is always gray. Just around the eyes, and then again the nose. Just have to be a little bit more careful around the eyes since, it's expected that they are more circular. It's not necessarily fur, it's just this block of skin here, right? So, just making sure these are a little bit more careful. And then the nose, again, shaped very much like a dog's nose, with the way it kind of comes down. Just creating a color swatch for the gray on that drawing layer, and then we will get started with the highlights. Alright, so I'm going to have the light source coming in from over here, and like always that means above and in front of, not behind or next to. And we're just going to put full pin pressure. Now even this edge, as it comes up to the ear, is going to have a little bit of shadow because the ears sink in just a bit from the head, right? Everything's rounded. The reason I didn't do that down here is there's still that strip of white, so where it runs into the white, I don't have to worry about having this sort of yellowish, tannish color in shadow. But even though this section connects to the ear and there's more to go, this would still be in shadow. It's still kind of rounding away. Now just like always, some of this over here, including like under the eye, will have a little bit of highlight, but it's going to be easier to fill the whole thing in shadow and then sort out the highlights from there. And foreheads tend to have more light on them, so you know, just like when you have a ball and there's nothing in the way, like once you get down in here, there's a lot of other things in the way that changes the contour of the face, but forehead is closer to the light source. There's nothing really blocking it typically with animals. So it's going to have more highlight come across a little further than anywhere else. Just have to make sure that this is a nice smooth transition. And we'll give it a little burst of light under the eyes. It's not full pen pressure, I'm just layering up more. And we'll have some of this in the white too. And we certainly still have the ears, but I'm going to go ahead and jump to the white. Although having said that, I'm going to pop back here real fast. And I started to do it on one side where I brought in some of these, you know, yellow strips here, but I didn't do it on this side. So let me just pull it in a bit. Muddy it up. Muddy it up. Since it would have some mixture of the other color. Now we'll jump to the white. The mouth is disconnected from the rest of the face, right? You have that gap. So you would have a little bit of shadow on the edge of that. And then of course underneath as well. We'll mix in some of the yellow on top. You can kind of see the mixture there, but it's not as nice as it needs to be. We can make it pop a little bit more. And then as it comes over this way, it would go back into shadow because there's usually a little dip. As animals, their cheeks meet here, there's that gap. So the fur's dipping back and away from the light source, so therefore there would be just a little bit of shadowing right there. Now I'm going to put this whole side in shadow, however, wouldn't necessarily be that way. So we'll do it shadow first and then add the highlight. Because the nose doesn't really block much of the light, so that this cheek would still have some highlight coming in. First of all, you're going to have a little bit of highlight kicking up here because just like this side's going into shadow, this side's going into highlight because it's doing the opposite thing. Helps if I can aim where my pin's going. And then we'll just sort of subtly, and again, once I layer up like this, I don't have to put full pin pressure. I'm not holding back like I typically am, but I'm not putting full pin pressure when I'm layering up onto an area I've already shadowed. When I'm going straight into highlight, I certainly do, but because at this point some of what's going to help is the amount of lines, I don't have to put a whole lot of pressure to make that happen. Alright, so now on to the ears. Although I am filling these in the white first, I'm going to switch over to the yellow after I sort of lightly fill them in on both sides. The yellow, the brown, the whatever you want to call it. Now, like I said, the white tufts still need, they'll get some highlights, but I'm going to do the yellowish tannish fur first, and then we'll go back in and add those highlights. You know, the backside of an ear, anytime you're doing it, right, if light source is coming from over here, this is going to be in shadow because that's away from the light source. And as we round to the top, you know, it'll start to shift into highlight. But, of course, all edges are in shadow, so just down in here. Just like on the other side, right? You have that back side that's going into shadow here. You have this side on the ear going into highlight because, you know, it's facing that light source. All right, so let's get the white ear tufts in there. So we've already sketched it, so now it's just adding the highlights. Being mindful of the fact that, right, it's going into the ear. So on this side, that's pretty straightforward, right? This side's going to be obviously in shadow, and you're going to have this, you know, edge in highlight. This side, it's not as straightforward. You're going to have an edge going into shadow, and then this back edge going into shadow, so the middle part of it is going to have that highlight. Just gonna, now's the chance to sort of really fan it out and to give it that kind of messy appearance that you're going to see with the, you know, the hair tufts in animals' ears. They're going to have that messy hair kind of going everywhere. It's nice to kind of sketch it that way, but sometimes it's easier to do it once you can add the highlights because you can really show the different directions the hair is going. Just making sure that it's going into that shadow, even down in here. In theory, this would all be yellow, and what's happening is the ear tufts are overrunning the ear there. Just making sure it's tapered in nicely. And then on this side, again, two sections won't be, so it's going to be this middle section that's going to have that highlight for a bit. Now it follows his head down pretty far, so that highlight's going to taper out as we come down. Being careful not to spread into here. Start backing it off through here with a few hairs catching it, depending on their angle. Make that more sporadic as we bring it down. Although that looks a little bit too much like a strip of light, so I'm going to taper it a bit. It's definitely over the yellow, right? So I want that to be clear, but it's still in shadow. Now to switch over to the gray. I'm going to start with the nose. Now the nose by, right, the nostrils down here, that's going to be in shadow because the nostrils are rounding away. That's true on both sides, but more true on this side since that's away from the light source. And all of this. Oh, it's black though. So it's black. I almost forgot I was going to do it in gray. So I am going to build it up more than what I've already done. But it does need to have light and pressure. Still trying to taper off that light, like I'm not trying to put full pin pressure. Now around the eyes. Do the same thing. I'm going to hold off the pin pressure and then give it a burst in a few select spots. Give it a little bit of a burst. It's the highlights and shadows that give it depth. So even when I have a section that needs to be black, or obviously I always draw it in gray, still need try and add shadows and highlights to give it that depth, especially on these eye rings, because the way the light's coming in, you would want, you know, you're going to have an edge in the eye right here, almost like, you know, the bottom part of our eyelid often catches a highlight. This is the same thing, right? Like this bottom section is going to catch highlight, this top section is going to catch highlight. Same thing over here. But, you know, this top section, that highlight isn't extending all the way to the edge of the eye because that's rounding away. Now for the eyes. Their eyes are brown. So, nice dark brown, but I can only go so dark. Yeah, so we're going to try that. Normally I check it with the select tool to make sure it's nice and straight, but when animals have these, you see it with goats too, when they have these sort of dashes for their pupils, it does make that a bit harder. I also find it a little harder to draw because I'm not as used to it, so I'm just going to come back in here and make sure it's straight. All right, now with the light source coming from over here, we are still going to do what we always do on that side, right? Like, still going to have that burst of light on the opposite side of the light source against the edge of the pupil. But we're going to follow that under all the way to the other side, and we're going to fade that out. Same thing on this side. Burst of light and follow it all the way under. That's with that full pin pressure and then tapering that out. And then when we draw it, it's full pin pressure on the side of the light source, right? But we'll fade out that pin pressure as we get to the edge of the pupil over here. But we want the brightness to connect in against this strip that's under the eye, right? So this whole like section will be in highlight under the pupil before it goes into shadow on the back side. Might have to fill in more like we do with birds, where we fill in more of the eye. The flatness of the pupil isn't translating as nicely when I add the highlights. It makes it look like he's looking up, so I may need to add more definition around it. I think we'll see what happens if we fill in just a little bit more. Don't want him to look shocked, so I'll have to taper back that pin pressure, but don't want him to look like he's looking up. Some of this could be the amount of space above his pupil and not the shape of it, but some of it likely is the shape of it. It's a little harder to judge. It's one of those things, you know, I've done it before, but it's not something I do very often. I'm drawing a squared off pupil, so it's a little harder because I'm not as familiar with it. Did actually help though. It's really holding back that pin pressure. It's the same thing we do when we draw birds. Sometimes we fully finish out the iris here, because birds, they don't have as much hair that's flopping down in front of them to cast as much shadow in their eyes, especially with owls. They're always kind of like wide and looking shocked. But you can do it with holding back pin pressure and sort of that shadow and highlight instead of allowing the black to create the shadow. But adding just that little bit of brown to give it detail and substance, I think that's helping in this case. Still allowing that shadow to be somewhat extreme, but not as extreme. Just like we did on this side. When I did that, I pulled this highlight on the right side up a bit. I think that's also adding a little bit of definition as well. Yeah. All right, so even though their pupils are rectangular, same thing applies with the light flare. It's still one of the most important things to add. And I'm still going to do it on the side that's in shadow first. Already changed the foreground color to white, so we're just going to fill it and then move it over. Do the same thing on this side. Yeah, it's pretty cute. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is add in some whiskers. The whiskers are black, so naturally that means I'm going to do it in gray. And when you're doing whiskers, you do it very lightly, but you kind of do these quick motions, and I'm drawing from the shoulder. So it's these quick motions from the shoulder. You want to bunch them up, so you don't want, one by itself. You're going to want several bunched up, coming off. And I want it seeable enough that you can kind of see it across his face a little bit. You don't have to do much. Same thing, whatever you do on one side, you need to do on the other. So if I have a lot coming down, you need to have some coming down, some coming over. So it's kind of up to you how you want it to look, but do need to make sure it matches on either side, whatever you've done. Same thing though, light pin pressure. And just build it up. Alright, so that is how you draw a yellow mongoose. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.